Hello everybody, is everyone alright? I'm alright, thank you. So it's been a minute, I haven't posted anything for about 2 months, or just over 2 months. And so today we're kind of doing what I used to do way back in the day, which is do a kind of seasonal wrap-up. This is what I've been reading I finished reading since January, since the start of the year. And I thought we'd better just round it off sooner than later because I am in what you may call a reading slump. Reading slump. And also this isn't going to be a very long one. I'm going to try not to make this too long. But I thought I want to sort of check in and say hello. But yes, so let's start at the very beginning. And so the first book I finished this year was After Sappho by Selby, Wynn, Shwartz. It was a library book, so I didn't have it with me. And I did something a bit cheeky. In my best books that I read in 2022, I included this, even though I was only halfway through. And I included it because I was so kind of like taken up by it. I was like, this is amazing! So I was like, so I included it. Having finished it, would I still include it in my best books of 2022? Maybe. I think it would definitely be an honorary mention. But possibly not one of the best books that I read. I think by the end, I'll get to what it's about in a minute, but by the end, I think I was like, okay, I get it, and, I was sort of like, yeah, I get it. So basically, the book is, I think what it is categorised as is, what is it, speculative non-fiction? Or kind of fictionalised non-fiction? It's taking the lives of real women, mostly from the late 19th to early 20th century, mostly all lesbian, mostly all creative types, and it kind of interweaves them all. The common theme is Sappho, and the poems of Sappho. And the way that it's done is what I like to categorise as a little bits novel. It's sort of these tiny little separated paragraphs. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Lincoln in the Bardo, just with the kind of the little bits. Michael Sharappa characterized it quite well. He likened it to, I don't know how you'd say it, like when you're in an art gallery or a museum and you have a painting, and then at the side you have like a little description of what the painting is. That's kind of what it feels like, and I sort of agree with that. So it's these little kind of snippets of these women's lives, and mostly women, and and it's kind of just talking about their lives and their loves, made a lot of time for women, and the way that society kind of treats them, and how that influences their work, and it is really fascinating. And yes, and so she talks about Virginia Woolf, and she talks about all these sorts of other people. But yeah, there's one writer, I wish I could remember what her name is, but she's an Italian novelist, and she has this incredible life, and she wrote this kind of auto-fiction novel called A Woman, I think. And what's fascinating is that at the end, I mean, this is kind of, it's historical fact, so spoilers, but not spoilers really. At the end, she kind of sells out, and she sort of becomes a writer for the fascist Italian government at the time. And it's just like, ooh. So there's just little things like that. It's a very interesting book. But yeah, it's an interesting book. I did feel by the end, I was sort of done with it. I thought it had exhausted its kind of style and things. But other than that, I do recommend it highly. I would like to reread it, actually, because it is very interesting. Next up, so I reread a book for reasons. So I reread Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And I reread this for a purpose, because I have been commissioned to adapt it for the stage, which I've done. I've finished the first draft. And what I like about this edition is the introduction, which I hadn't read before, because it sort of hadn't clicked really how late in the 19th century that it was published. It was published in 1883. And which is kind of later than I thought, because it's set in the 1700s. So yeah, he cites kind of Dickens as a big inspiration with the characters, which makes sense, and Moby Dick and stuff like that. So it's kind of it's a very interesting introduction. And and as a story in the book, I mean, it's he wanted it to be an adventure book for boys, adventure story for boys, and you definitely do have a theme of kind of transcending the father and being brave and trust, and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, it's just a very it's a jolly old romp. That's what I'd say. Now, when you're adapting something, you've got to make a big decision, as Bob Ross would say, and that is, do you read and watch other adaptations, or do you not? Do you go straight in with your own kind of thing? And I chose the former just because I didn't want to. I kind of wanted to know what other people had done, and also didn't want to sort of think that, I've got an amazing idea and someone had done it before. And so I watched the Eddie Izzard version from 2012, I think. That's on YouTube somewhere, so I watched that, which was interesting. And I also read the Bryony Lavery adaptation. This is the one that she did for The National, which I think was in 2014. And it was sort of well thought of and stuff. And if you look at, and this is kind of an example of budget, like what you can do with budget. And if you look at clips of this production on YouTube, then you can see just like... And then it's also interesting what she takes liberties with, like especially in the second half, like how she sort of changes the plot around and the characters. So just very fascinating. And yeah, so I finished and sent off the first draft, and it seems to have gone well. So yes, and that's going to be on in the summer in Devon, in Exmoor. So yes, really exciting stuff. Next up. So I read The Hobbit by J.R.R.Tolkien. Oh, this is fabulous, isn't it? So this is a reread, but I have not read this since I was a kid, basically. It's my plan to read through the Middle-earth books this year. This and the trilogy. And I read this, and this is just fabulous, isn't it? It's just it's a really, really good adventure story. It's just really, really fabulous. And it makes me cross. It makes me cross because the films are so off the mark, aren't they? They're just so kind of... I mean, there's lots of reasons why they are so off the mark, and I would refer you to the Lindsay Ellis documentary series to find out all about that. But, but it's just fabulous, isn't it? Bilbo, the Hobbit, being whisked away on an adventure by Gandalf with the dwarves to reclaim the treasure taken by Smaug the dragon. And it's about their kind of... their adventures along the way and the people that they meet and creatures that they meet. And it's just, it's just very, very enjoyable and adventurous. And it's interesting because this does not feel like Lord of the Rings at all. It's very different. It's very sort of cozy, warm. I mean, it feels like it's written for a younger audience, but it's not patronising in that kind of way. It's just very kind of, it's just got a tone, a sort of very kind of, a tone which is not Lord of the Rings, and that's where the film's kind of scuppered, isn't it? Also, there's a character called Bjorn, the bear guy, who in the films they just get completely wrong. In this, he's just like, I loved him. He's very much in line for question, I think, 8 of the mid-year freakout tag. And yeah, I just love the whole thing, so I'm really, really excited to read Lord of the Rings now. Really, really excited. Okay, so next, I read a poetry book. I don't read a lot of poetry, and it kind of shows, because I don't really understand a lot of it, but this is kind of an important book to have read. This is Skin of Nocturnal Apple. This is by Misha Honcharenko. And Misha is Ukrainian, and he lives in Ukraine at the moment. Interesting because it goes from... all the poems are dated, and it goes from 2018 through to 2021. Obviously, that's not including the current Russian invasion, but it is kind of about... It's about Ukraine and just the feeling of being in Ukraine around this time. And the poems are very intense. They're very they're about love and lust and the feeling of a country being assaulted. And it's very, very vivid in its descriptions and in its kind of imagery. As I say, I don't read a lot of poetry at all, like modern poetry. So there's sort of things that I was just like, okay, but you do get a very vivid sense of emotion and of this sense of being of major injustice, you know. And I guess it's just an insight into the feeling of this time, this time period. And yes, I would thoroughly recommend it. And also, you'll be supporting a Ukrainian writer who is in Ukraine at the moment. So yes, I do thoroughly recommend it. Okay, next up, I'm not going to talk too much about this one, but I got this from the library, and that is Heartburn by Nora Ephron. So yeah, this was a very impulse-driven read from the library. I had watched the film years ago with Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson.
Charged everything. I mean, look at this flower. Look at all these flowers that you bought her. And you occasionally brought me home a bunch of wilted zinnias.
And I was just, and I like that film, and so I was just interested to see it just sort of stuck out to me. I was like, oh yeah, let's try that. So I did. So yeah, it's kind of auto-fiction a little bit from Nora Ephron, although the character in this is a TV food writer. Or at least she's a food writer who goes on TV a little bit. And it's about the breakdown of her marriage after she discovers that her husband's having an affair. And this is whilst they have a toddler and she is pregnant with their second child. So she's sort of discovering all this stuff in this situation. And yes, and it being Nora Ephron, it is very kind of wry. It's very funny. It's kind of got a, as I tried to describe it, it's got a raised eyebrow New York kind of humour, if that makes any sense at all.
Oh, just the way of wrangling a phrase and sort of polishing it with the front of your mouth. You know, that whole thing.
And yeah, I just really like it. It's interesting kind of because the film sort of charts this couple's relationship from beginning to end, and the book, it actually kind of starts when she discovers the infidelity. And yeah, just as an impulse read, I thoroughly recommended it, so I shall recommend it to you as well. Heartburn. And watch the film as well, because Meryl's hilarious. Oh, okay, next. So, I tried. I tried! I mean, I tried with this one. I didn't quite read it properly, but it didn't work, did it?
It didn't work, did it?
So I tried to read The Prince by Machiavelli. I've been told that this is kind of like a seminal work of writing from the Renaissance. This is non-fiction. It's kind of a manifesto of how a ruler should best rule, or how a ruler should most effectively rule a nation or a country without sort of getting assassinated or being usurped or whatever. And it's fairly controversial because he basically says that in order to rule effectively as a prince, you kind of need to be willing to do some shady things. You have to be sort of willing to murder and to do lots of nasty stuff. Sort of be despotic to a point. He sort of says you can't be a complete tyrant. Because then people will want to kind of get rid of you, but you can't be a pushover either, because then people who are sort of more tyrant-esque than you are going to go and kill you, assassinate you. So you kind of got to have this sort of balance between being kind of honourable as a leader and being downright wicked. And that's why it's controversial, because a lot of kind of rulers have sort of taken this as kind of gospel in reading it as a sort of fit way to govern, which makes a lot of sense. So yeah, so there's the famous thing is like it's better to be feared than loved. So yeah, ruling is not so much a popularity contest as it is just keeping people in line, and sort of you don't want people to sort of by keeping people afraid of you, you kind of lessen the risk of them wanting to kind of assassinate you and stuff. So it's interesting. I mean, it's a bit of a dry read for me, and that's why I kind of, in the end, I ended up sort of skim reading it a bit, because I was just like, oh, come on. Even though it's very, very short. I suppose it is interesting, but for me, I mean, political philosophy and political history is interesting to a point. I read it because I'd heard that it's so kind of influential as a piece of work from the Renaissance. One must be a fox in order to recognise traps, and a lion to frighten off wolves. So yeah, there you go. So yeah, maybe at one point I'll read it properly, but... And lastly, oh gosh, I want to talk a little bit more about this one. So this was an impulse buy from a charity shop. It's a Penguin classic. So I read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Ooh! So yes, this was a very sort of spur-of-the-moment impulse buy. I didn't really know much about it. The only thing I knew, the only image in my head that I had was the black man and the white boy on a raft down the river. That's kind of the only thing that I had in my head. Oh, ow! Wow! Oh! Sorry. So I started to read it. Now, there's two sort of main things that sort of jumped out at me when I first started to read this. The first is that I didn't realise, but this is actually a sequel, which I didn't know. So the first book is The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and it kind of expressly says that in the first sentence. It's like, this is the sequel to that book. And I was like, oh. So I quickly went on to internet, and I was like, do I need to read Tom Sawyer before I read this? And the kind of general consensus was no, you can read this as a standalone. So I was like, okay, that's fine. The second thing that jumped out at me was the N-word usage. There's more N-words in this book than you can shake a Tarantino DVD at. And, you know, that's something that it's kind of like, it's either something that you're comfortable contextualizing or compartmentalizing, or you're not. And if you're not, then there's no point, and you don't have to read this book. It's a look at the feeling of white America at the time, and a country sort of trying to come to terms kind of mentally and emotionally with what had just happened with the Civil War. I think this was published 20 years after the Civil War. So yes, it is a book which is all about race. So yes, you have Huckleberry Finn, who at the beginning of the book escapes. He runs away from his abusive father. He fakes his own murder. Very quickly he runs into Jim, who is an enslaved man who has run away from the house where he is enslaved. And so they run away together, and they end up on this raft, and they go down the Mississippi River. And it's basically just about the adventures or the people that they meet along the way. And at the centre of it, you have this very interesting, if very uncomfortable, dilemma with Huckleberry Finn, where he has to sort of struggle between his innate kind of empathy and then also this kind of learnt structural societal racism, which is just a given for him. And it's these two things that kind of start to pick away at each other. In particular, there's a moment which is very uncomfortable to read, where they've been along the road, and they've formed a friendship and all the rest of it. And then Jim discloses that he actually has a wife and children back at this farm or this house. And his plan is to travel up to the Free States, get a job, and earn enough money in order to sort of buy his family's freedom, basically. And you would think, as a modern reader, that this is the moment where Huckleberry Finn kind of thinks, oh, I had no idea that you had a family. I had no idea. Yes, let's do it. I'm going to help you, and we're going to do this thing. But no, that's not what happens. He is actually horrified by this information, and he starts to think, I'm actually helping a criminal, because he still thinks of Jim as someone's property who has sort of run away. And he starts to kind of think, oh, do I turn Jim in? Do I sell him out? And yes, it's just very sort of uncomfortable, like, moment. So, yes. And that's the kind of what Mark Twain, I think, is trying to sort of get at, which is this kind of, it's idea of white America trying to sort of come to terms with their relationship to black people and race and racism and slavery and all the rest of it. So it's very interesting in that regard. I mean, Mark Twain, from what I've read, was an abolitionist, and it's important to differentiate the fact that abolitionism as an idea is not the same as modern day anti-racism, which is where kind of white saviorism and stuff comes into play. And certainly as the character Jim, there is a bit of kind of what's the word, infantilization of him a little bit. So there's that. I did find it interesting though. I don't know what I was expecting with it. I think I was just intrigued by the historical nature of it all and stuff. So yeah, an interesting one. Is there anything else I want to say about it? Don't think so. Don't think so. Yeah. It's not kind of required. I mean, because in the UK we don't. It's not on our reading lists at school. We don't study this at school. So yes, but as a window into that time from a white perspective, it is kind of interesting. So yes. So there we go. So at the moment, I'm reading. Oh gosh. So I've got 3 books on the go. I'm in the middle of reading Tar Baby by Toni Morrison. I started this 2666, and I'm also slowly working through Canamonte Bed Bread, very very slowly. But as I say, I haven't really been reading. Even though I've started these 3, I haven't really been reading a lot. Because I am in a bit of a reading slump, not kind of unhappily, but yeah, that's where we're at. So yes, that's what I've been reading so far this year. Hopefully, it won't be too long before I do another wrap up, but we shall see. I've got other exciting stuff happening with plays and things this summer. Not just Treasure Island, but something else, which is keeping me busy. And yes. So yes, thank you for watching if you've been watching, and I shall hopefully see you very soon. So goodbye.